Hello, colleagues. Good afternoon. I hope all of you can hear me clearly. Can I just get some indication? Cobus, maybe you can just show with a thumb. Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Good. It's good to
Yeah,
see you. One is talking into this monitor, and yeah, it's good to Peter Flynn also give an indication that he can hear us clearly. So, thank you, colleagues. Welcome to day number 2 of the ATSA Conference of 2021. This afternoon, I'm chairing the session for the first 2 speakers. We have the presentation of Professor Kobus Murray, and then I'll introduce the other speakers now. Can I just ask for right at the beginning, Kobus, you will do your presentation round about for half an hour, and then we have some discussion and questioning for another 15 minutes or so. Colleagues are free to raise their hands and give an indication or pose their questions to Kobus after his presentation. It's customary, of course, just to give a short introduction to our speakers, but I'm not sure whether Kobus need any introduction. All of you are familiar, but in short, Kobus is professor at the University of Free State, and his research interest focuses on translation studies, semiotics, intersemiotic translation, translation and development, etc. And this afternoon, Kobus will talk on, or his topic of his paper for this afternoon is Analysis of Cognitive Tools, expanding the notion of community in community translation. I'm sure Kobus will give us enough food for thought, and after his presentation, I will introduce the second presentation, that of Lindy Dacre and Samuel Popane. Thank you, Kobus. We're looking forward to listen to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. I just want to move everything out of my screen here so that I can see what I need to talk about. Colleagues, thank you very much, colleagues in Ghana, for hosting this and for a great opening yesterday that touched us. It's an honor to be part of the conference and to be able to talk to colleagues from the continent. So, just to get this going. So the theme of the conference, as we all know by now, is community translation and interpreting. And typically, one would start thinking about something like community translation and interpreting by asking, is it really necessary? So whether you call it community translation interpreting, public service interpreting, non-professional interpreting, or translation, are these things really necessary? Now, many people might think that this is a foregone conclusion, but there might be people who specialize in conference interpreting who might say, no, these kinds of things are not really necessary, and neither are they interpreting and translation. So if I then start my talk by saying, well, there may also be some of you that say, yes, this is necessary, like I would say. The question is why? And typically one gets a number of reasons why. Well, being addressed in your language, receiving a service in your language is a human right. We want public participation in our civil institutions for the sake of democracy. We need people to understand what the politicians and the people in power, bureaucrats too, are talking about. And if you even want to go as far as developing human capabilities, one would say, well, these are reasons why community translation is necessary. But I sometimes have the feeling that there's something else that we are missing, and that is what I, for now, will just call everyday or everybody interpreting and translation. And I know that Prof. Flynn yesterday said that all translation and interpreting is everyday. I understand why he said it, and I would, from that context, I would agree. My question is just, in our context, are we really able to see this everyday interpreting and translation and everybody interpreting and translation? With the theories that we have, are we able to see it? Obviously, with ethnography, we are, but I want to suggest another way of looking at this. So what I think sort of trying to explore here is if we can move this everyday or everybody interpreting and translation into semiotic translation too, not excluding intralingual and interlingual translation, but moving it a bit broader. So what I want to do today is to blend three concepts in my effort to start thinking about these things, to blend three concepts, namely Douglas Robinson's notion of icosis, and blend that with intersemiotic translation, which I will explain, and blend the two of them with the extended mind hypothesis, which I will also try to explain briefly. And then I would like to give you one brief example and then one even briefer example. So icosis is a term that Douglas Robinson introduced into translation studies. I think the 2016 version was the first time, but probably I missed earlier ones. So what Robinson is interested in is not how to compare a source text and a target text to decide when something is a good translation. Also, he's not interested in understanding how I, as a translator, on my own, decide what is a good or a bad translation and how I would translate certain texts. But he's interested in a collectivized, that's the first red highlighted word that I have there, in a collectivized kind of meaning-making process, where it is not me, I, who make the meaning myself, but I make it as part of a community. The language I use has been created by a community before me. The kind of meanings and values that are important comes from that collective. He says that he wants to see meaning making as a process. That's why I also highlighted in red the becoming part. So you have affective, becoming conative, becoming cognitive. To explain how meaning grows from mere awareness of possible meanings to arguments and detailed explanations of meaning. But all of this happen in the group. And this is what he calls icosis. So he borrows the term icosis from the Greeks. And that says that stories become plausible because they are being performed in a community and they are being told retold in a community. Whether the latter part is a good argument is up for discussion, but I wanted to focus on the possibility of thinking in terms of translation and interpreting as a collective endeavor in what one could then call a community. So Robinson uses icosis to think about the correctness of translation choices. So he says, rather than comparing with the source text, what we should do is to see what is the icotic forces in a target culture, in a target language, that makes one sort of feel in your gut that you need to translate something this way or that way, and obviously which people then fight about and disagree about. So his question is basically not, was this translator correct, but will a community of interpreters or a community of readers judge a translation or an interpretation at the effective, conative, and cognitive levels as acceptable? would that work within this broader community? Now, there's obviously more to how this community work than I can explain in a brief discussion. But so the point is, I think that Robinson correctly makes, is that it would help us to think about translation and interpreting in terms of a collectivized community perspective. So my question then further is, can ICOSIS contribute to our understanding of this everyday, everybody translation and interpreting? So the point I'm trying to take, and here I'm translating Robinson's Greek term ICOSIS into a term from the Bantu languages, namely Ubuntu. So we are aware in the context in which we operate and live that the term Ubuntu is used for community, for people helping each other be human and be people. So I think this point translates into what we already have in some cultures at least. So obviously when Robinson talks about ICOSIS, in everything that I've read, and maybe I haven't read everything of his, but he applies it to interlingual translation, interlingual and intralingual translation. And my question again is, would it be possible to think about ICOSIS in intersemiotic translation? So if it is, in other words, if we build communities and if we build meanings as communities, and we don't only do this by means of language, but we also do it by ways of other signs. The song that we sang, the music that we enjoyed and enjoined yesterday, the Hakuna Matata song. So we had language there, but we also had the music, which touched us and brought us into a unified space, as it were, the same space. So my question is then, if ICOSIS applies not only to language, but to all other meaning-making systems like visual, tactile, smell, and hearing, and taste, then it means that it actually applies to all our interactions, because all our interactions are based on these senses and on the translation of information the sensory information we get as signs. So the kind of questions that I'm interested in is then, how does culture emerge? Where does it come from? How is it made? And I think it's exactly made through this process of icotic intersemiotic translation, where we as groups of people together create meaning out of the environment and the history in which we live. It is made, cultures emerge through translating signs into other signs. I think the colleague from Nigeria yesterday made a sort of a similar kind of argument, saying that the author that he was discussing borrowed from other sign systems. And in that sense, if I understood him correctly, translation is a community endeavor, because it brings the meanings of communities together and create novel thought out of that. So just quickly for two examples. I think I'm going to drop the novel one because I've already referred to it, and our colleague yesterday explained it. But in South Africa, we have a bizarre cultural phenomenon called isikutane, which is where rich people burn their money to show how rich they are. So you burn money or you burn fancy clothes to show that it doesn't matter to you. You're so rich, this 1,000 can just burn, right? So the question is, what I think what we need to be interested in is how these happenings, these events get translated into meaningful cultural practices which people follow and which people actually give names and start enjoying and start exploiting. And these are all, at first, there's one person starting the action and other people take it over and they translate it into other systems of meaning. So the question is, can we think about icosis as extended? Now, the extended mind hypothesis is a theory in cognitive, coming from cognitive theory, and it makes a very simple, though highly debated claim that we offload some cognitive tasks onto the environment. In other words, what they say, we don't think inside our brains only. We think inside our brains, but also inside our bodies, and also in an extended way inside the environment. For instance, if children want to say a poem at school, they have to recite a poem which they had to memorize. They would typically move from the left to the right as the lines go on, you know, twinkle, twinkle, little star. And it's been proven that that helps them, the movement helps them remember. And that is why in many autolit cultures, bodily movements and bodily practices are really involved in the performance itself. But it's not only that we think in our bodies, we also think outside of with the help of outside material phenomena like notebooks. If I take my pen and I make a note that tomorrow I should do this and this, I offload the memory task onto my paper. We do it with diaries. We do it by looking at the internet. We do it by storing numbers on our phones. My mother can remember virtually all phone numbers of friends, but you can't find it on a cell phone. She has it in her mind. We download it onto the cell phone. So the extended mind hypothesis then says that we don't only think inside the brain, we also think inside the body, and we think with the help of our environment. We change our environment to help us think better. So the question is, would it be possible to extend the extended mind hypothesis to include icosis? Would it be possible to say that cultures download their cognitive tasks into their environment to different extents? And I indeed think for now that it must be possible, because if we assume that we think and that we make meaning and that we translate in an icotic way, it means that those cognitive functions of thinking, translating, making meaning should all be extended, and it should extend into the culture as a whole. Now, culture can be, let's say, English culture or Akan culture, or it could be broadly Western or African or Eastern culture, or it could just be human nature, if you will, broadly. So I think at the very least, the memories or the minds of people sharing a culture contribute that culture, and that culture is therefore distributed in many brains. We help each other be in a culture because all of us have part of that culture and we enact it all together. So in that sense, for me, one can talk about extended intersemiotic icosis. So to demonstrate where I'm going with this, I want to show you something, and the people from Ghana will immediately recognize this. I will, for the moment, not tell you now what it is, but explain to you in my presentation. I'm not going to analyze this one. I will analyze another one, but this is just an example of what I want to talk about. So this little image that I showed you, if you search it on the internet, you will find that it's called the linguist staff. And it is a staff that was used in the Ghana area, and probably in other areas too. I haven't studied it all that broadly. Used by what is called in that language the Okiahame. Sorry if my pronunciation is not good, Ghana colleagues. In other words, the rhetorical expert in a community. So there were these people who were rhetorical experts, and they mediated between the chief and the king and the people, and each of them had a poma like this, a staff, and some had many staffs, which they used as official symbols for when they performed their duties. So in terms of pragmatic theory, one could explain what this Okiahame did as something like reported speech. He would come to the nation and he would say, or the community, and say, the king said. And he would either say exactly what the king said, or if the king said it too harshly, he would rephrase it. Or it could be explained as surrogation. So he doesn't say the king says, but he would just say, this is what's going to happen. So he becomes a surrogate for the king. And it is a way to deal with face-to-face communication and with all the complexities of face-to-face communication. So why were there people like these, the Okiahame? Well, firstly, to avoid the king coming face-to-face with people in certain cases, because it might be, I mean, there were symbolic and religious reasons or power reasons why the king didn't want to face people, because it mystified the chief. It ritualized the interaction between the chief and people. It focused on consensus, because with the Okiahame as a sort of a mediator, there was the possibility that if things get heated, he could cool things down, and he could actually manage the force of the king's authority. So we have this institution, a person who has the specific role that he played. There were also female, if I understand correctly, but the female Okiahame worked for the let's say the chief's wife, or the queen, if I understood correctly. But that's sort of beside the point. So the staffs seem to be based on British examples. There are debate about whether the staffs existed before the colonial era, but the practice of somebody intermediating between the chief and the people, that's definitely pre-colonial according to the sources that I've read. Now, to understand what's going on here, I quickly want to explain three types of signs that Charles Peirce identified. The first type of sign is an icon. An icon is a sign that resembles the thing that it represents, right? So a photo of granddad would immediately resemble granddad. Yes, I can see that's granddad's ear, or that's granddad's nose, or that's granddad's smile. I recognize it. So icons resemble the things that they represent. Indexes cause or point to the things that they represent. So a weather vane, let's say at a weather sock at the airport, if it points in a certain direction, you know that the wind is blowing through it, so the wind is blowing from the opposite direction. So the weather vane itself is not the wind, but it's an index. It points to the direction that the wind blows, and the wind causes it to point in that direction. And then you have symbols which are conventional signs, like words. So it is, we agree to call something a rose. So there's a habit or a convention behind it. Now, if we then look at this Palma, so this is usually these staffs were plated in gold because that area is one of the gold-rich areas in the world. So we have here a little boy on the right-hand side touching a lion on the left-hand side. So what do we have here? Obviously, the photo is an icon of the staff, but the staff is an icon of a child touching a lion, right? So we immediately recognize there's a little child touching a lion. The image is not that good, so you may not immediately recognize it, right? But this staff, so we're not going to talk now about the photo of the staff. I'm trying to talk about the staff. The staff is an index of a child, an icon of a child touching a lion, but the staff is also an index of the power or the authority of the Okihame. So the staff which he holds in his hand points to the power that he has and to the authority that he has. But it also, and this is the very interesting thing, it also points to a proverb. So all these staffs were made in such a way that they pointed to some kind of proverb or wisdom. So this staff is an icon. It's also an index, but it's also a symbol. It's a symbol that there are cultural values, and the cultural value that is represented here is ignorance can be dangerous. A child doesn't know how dangerous a lion is. It can be really dangerous. So the whole intersemiotic meaning-making process helps us to engage the physical staff in front of us, the way it indexes authority and the proverb, and then the way in which the proverb creates meaning for the people who watches the staff. So for each occasion, the Okihame had to choose a palma, a staff. And that's exactly where the semiotic work comes in, because he had to read the situation and choose a particular staff with which to make a particular case. A very quick second example, and I'm running out of time, is what we find on seed packets, and this is more in the economy these days. So you can see a whole lot of images here. There are words, but there are also a whole lot of drawings and images. In other words, for this seed package to work, there has to be a process of intersemiotic translation and not only intralingual or interlingual translation. But that's just a very brief point I need to finish. So the question is, in the examples that I've shown, where's the translation? If you look for interlingual and intralingual translation in the staff example, there's none. There just is no translation there. But if you look for intersemiotic translation, the example of the staff gives us a translation at the level of icon, which gives us meaning, at the level of index, which points to certain authority, and at the level of symbol, which explains to us the meaning of the icon. In the seed package, it's more varied. So the important thing is that if we can study multimodal translation, it places pre-colonial times on an equal footing with others, because now we don't have to study written texts. We can study practices, we can study artifacts, we can study memories, we can study habits, we can study ways things happened to understand how meaning was made in pre-colonial times and compare it maybe for now. So the point is that multimodal translation gives us an access to semiotic work. namely the choice of the poema, the interpretation of the situation. And then the effect of that work is a choice of a particular poema. So the implications, I think I'll make it in time. For me, community translation can quickly also become a silo on its own. Like we have conference interpreting, we could have community translation and interpreting that just does certain things, and other things are regarded as non-professional translation and interpreting, and other things are regarded as everyday or ad hoc translation and interpreting. For me, the point to start is that all forms of translation and interpreting is part of this extended icotic process, which allow people to participate in, and not only participate, but to create culture and society through various tasks. So it's not only community interpreting and translation, or professional or interlingual interpreting and translation. Non-professional translation, I think, plays a similar role, but it's much more widely prevalent. And it's actually much more difficult to see because it's so part of our everyday life. It's like breathing. You don't realize that you're doing it, but you're doing it. So I think what this allows us to do is to study this kind of everyday, everybody, lay, natural, ad hoc, whatever we want to call it, translation in everyday practices. This ties in, I think, for me, to the aim of the kind of scholarship that we want in Africa. We want to study, how did we get to be the way we are? What do we need to change, or what do we want to change? And how do we go about it? But we can only do this based on knowledge and information and thought through approaches. And this is what we as a society and as scholars can contribute to our societies, is to bring this knowledge about how do these things work? How are cultures and societies created? So I think studying our societies and cultures through the lens of extended intersemiotic icosis could provide one avenue for achieving this aim. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Cobus. I just want to, as I've said, thought-provoking indeed, Cobus. While colleagues are getting their questions and their hands ready, I wonder, can I pose a question, Cobus?
You're welcome.
And that is, and that is, you started off by saying or asking the question, is it really necessary to have the notion of community translation with the emphasis on community? But then immediately you said people working in conference interpreting will say, but we don't need this, right? Linking it then also further with your whole notion of the extended mind hypothesis. For me, it seems as a layperson that the boundaries are then sort of blurred. Right at the end of your presentation, you say, right, so we study this everyday practice of, or we want to study this everyday practice of, let's call it everyday translation or everyday community interpreting. You pose the question, how should we go about to gain this knowledge, to get more knowledge about interpreting? What do we do on the African continent? And my question is merely, isn't that, coming from a linguistic point of view, isn't that what linguists are doing? They want to they want to break it up in smaller pieces. They want to look at the phenomena, break it up in smaller pieces, whether it's community interpreting, whether it's community translation or conference interpreting. And it's only then that we will be able to focus on this phenomena and make a study and make generalization, so to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I think my idea is not to say that people are not doing this in different ways. My idea would be to say, what can we add? How can we enrich, or how can we amend what is being done? For instance, in translation studies, okay, let me also just maybe say first, I wanted to say conference interpreters might say. I didn't want to say they will say, because I know not everybody will, but they might, for instance, be. But okay, so the point that I wanted to make is that the way in which we conceive our field of interest determines what we see. And in translation studies, the dominant way of looking at translation and interpreting is to say, let us look at where there is something called translation or interpreting. I mean, Turi was very clear in that, saying a translation is something that is regarded as a translation in the target culture. And I find that problematic, and that's probably where the angle that I want to take is to say there are things happening every day which are not called translation. But you take a particular theoretical angle, it allows you to study these, to study the translational aspect of these things. And I'm not saying that these things are only or inherently translations. I mean, doing business is, you know, selling something is doing business. Going to church is performing your religion. Going to vote is exercising your civil rights. So these things are different things, but they each have a translational aspect to them of how meanings are translated into other meanings. For instance, by listening to a politician and then making a cross on my ballot paper, I am in a symbolic way participating in a translational process. So I think that's sort of yes, it obviously is being done. I wanted to perhaps open up the perspective even further, if that helps.
Okay, thank you for that. Peter? Your microphone, perhaps. I think it's maybe muted.
Maybe Peter should type a question.
Okay, I think Peter's can't hear us, or we can't hear him. Is there another question, perhaps? Good. Samuel. Then we have Professor Bandia. Samuel.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Kobus, for the excellent presentation. However, I just want to, it's more of a contribution. to particularly your details on the linguist staff, which locally called the Oche. I noticed that you use the past instead of the past to refer to the use of the linguist staff. But just to draw your attention that it is something that is still being used in the chief presidency system in Ghana. So it's just to draw your attention to it. It is still being used, and it's still being used in the country. So that was just your attention to it.
Yes. Thanks, Samuel. I'm aware of that, and I apologize for not making it clear. My line of argument was that because this originated in colonial and pre-colonial times, it might give us a methodology into pre-colonial Africa, because quite often the debate is that translation studies cannot really deal with pre-colonial Africa because there are no written texts available. But there are many signs and meanings inscribed into practices and artifacts that we could study. So yes, I'm also aware that many different cultural groups have varieties of this kind of practice. For instance, a previous student of mine studied Venda royal language. The Venda is a group of people in the northern part of South Africa, and they have royal, what they call royal language, which is sort of a way of also mystifying the chief and ritualizing the chief. So there are probably many other practices like these which are still being done, because the royal Venda is still being practiced. Yes, so sorry for not mentioning it, but I'm aware that it's still continuing.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Bandia. Maybe just unmute your
Okay,
microphone.
can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right, okay. Thank you so much, Jacobus, for this very thought-provoking presentation. It's really fascinating. I picked up on something right at the very beginning of the presentation, which from a purely translation studies or translation perspective, I'm just curious to know how you can enlighten me on this, because you had said at the very beginning that correctness of translation is something that is really quite important in this discussion. And I was wondering how the monolingual reader can determine the correctness of translation, since it's generally assumed that translations, basic translation is often targeted towards monolingual, or basically to facilitate understanding for the monolingual reader or speaker. So it's a very basic question, but I think it's quite interesting, to know exactly in the context of semiotics how the monolingual reader, who is often the target of translation, can be in a position to determine the correctness of translation.
Yeah. I think, thanks, Paul, that's a good question. I think, so let me just first say, when I spoke about the correctness of a translation, I did not say from my own perspective that it was important. I was trying to say Robinson developed the notion of icosis to talk about issues of correctness of translation. So you will know, and everybody will know, that the whole equivalence debate has always been to compare source and target text, and Douglas probably expands Gideon Toury's idea of a target text orientated translation into not only the translator or the target language, but the target readers as a group. So whether indeed correctness is important will always be a debate. So I'm just referring to Robinson here. But the crucial point I think that you point out, and I think that Robinson Robinson's theory at least can explain to us is that even when a monolingual reader does not know the source text, the icosis, in other words, the values and the meanings distributed in a community will, and that's simple things like sometimes grammar use or style or politeness, these kinds of things. So these, Douglas would say that these values are distributed in a reading community and embodied in their bodies, so that you can even do empirical tests and ask people to read a translation, and you will find rises in temperature, rises in skin temperature, rises in heartbeat, rises in all these kinds of things. So I think the monolingual reader will sometimes pick these things up just because the style of a translated text will jar with their gut, with what we call their gut. Douglas Robinson is trying to say that gut is actually an embodied form of the meanings that are spread throughout the culture. In my own case, I can very quickly in the morning when I listen to a news bulletin, I can very quickly say which parts were translated and which parts were not. Just because of if you're part of a certain Afrikaans speaking group, you have in Robinson's terms, the icotic values embodied in you. Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and I haven't spoken to Douglas about it, but I assume it will also work for a monolingual. In fact, it will really work very well for monolingual readers, and maybe we can do more empirical research, reception study research on these kind of things, and even if we have laboratories which can test blood pressure and skin, there are a number of cognitive tests, embodied cognitive tests that one can do for this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Corpus. I'm going to take a last question, very short question, hopefully, from Sibonam Chachu.
Yes, thank you very much. It's not so much maybe a contribution. Thank you so much, Prof. Kobus. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So it made me think, for example, that we can actually look at things beyond even our fabrics, our textiles. Because in Ghana, our fabrics actually have names. And
Yes.
they have reasons behind them. Beyond the kente, we have funeral cloth, we have different cloths with different names, which sometimes also go from the Dinkra symbol. So you're just giving us food for thought that translation goes beyond text, and also to look at the semiotic aspect. So thank you, really, I enjoyed it.
Yes, I actually, when I worked on this, I got data from a wide variety of sources. And then I think, I'm not sure from which university, I will go and have a look, but there's somebody at a university in Ghana, it might be your university, who did a master's degree about these textiles.
Yeah.
And patterns in the textiles. And I really think, and then I was thinking that one could actually use that in terms of translation. I mean, the French Roland Barthes in the 1960s have already written about fashion and the semiotics of fashion. So we could also maybe study try to understand certain translational processes in our societies in terms of these fabrics. So if you have data, then maybe we should talk and we can put something together. I think it's a great idea. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder, Corpus, do you have access to the question that Peter has just posted in the
Yes.
chat? Will you quickly respond to that, seeing that we don't have a coffee break, so to speak? We have a virtual coffee break, and he won't be able to pose it directly to you, so maybe very shortly.
Peter, that's a question you need to ask Michael Cronin. He would be better able to say. I think the environment is not necessarily semiotic. The environment can be as, I mean, semiotics it basically talks about this inexplainable link between matter and ideas, right? So an environment, a semiotic environment, is also a material environment. It can never be only idea. It's a combination. So obviously, I think the place where our Earth is today is the effect of a translation process, of translating our ideas into practices which hurt the environment, right? So that's, I think it's a really great question, but it goes sort of a step or two further than I thought at this point. But it's a great question, and I think obviously every translational process has some kind of effect, and that effect then has to be judged as, is it good or is it bad for the people, for the environment, for the culture, etc. Thanks, Peter. Great question.
Okay, thank you once again, Kobus, for your presentation. Colleagues, so while the next speakers are getting ready, sharing their screens or their slides, we just take a, say, 50 minutes break. While they're doing so, then I'll introduce them. Thank you. Colleagues, we're back. It seems that our next paper presentation is also ready and will be conducted by Lindy Dakey and Samuel Bobang. Both of them are from the French department from the University of Ghana. Very short introduction also about the two candidates. Both of them are instructors for translation at the Department of French at University of Ghana, and their interests generally cover translation technologies and the use at academic institutions. The topic of their paper, as you can see, translator training and market needs, the case of two public institutions in Ghana. Colleagues, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And good afternoon to everyone. It's a great pleasure to present, to participate in this conference. So I'll first of all like to talk about a little bit about how this whole idea of conducting this research came about. So sometime in 2018 at the General Assembly meeting of the Ghana Association of Translators and Interpreters, the discussion focused on revamping the association that had collapsed for some time. And so The association wanted to improve the standards of translation in Ghana and weed out non-professionals who are taking over the market. And so this new association was being formed, and individuals who wanted to be members of the association were expected to apply and provide documents showing that they had had some form of training as translators. And members of the old association who had been practicing for some time but didn't have any form of training as translators were urged to get some training. And so the questions that came to mind were, will this group of people find the curriculum we have interesting enough to want to enroll? Because they've been on the market, they know what is required. And even if they enrolled, would the expectations and needs be met in relation to the ever evolving realities of the translation market? And so we decided to conduct a study on translator training and market needs in Ghana, using 2 public institutions as the case study. For this presentation, we'll just give a brief background of translator training in Ghana. We'll draw on some research that have already been conducted in this area, and also talk about why we feel it is important to conduct the study, what we are looking for in the study. We'll try to answer some questions because this study is yet to be conducted. We haven't conducted it yet, so tentatively answer some of the questions we've posed, drawing on our own experience and the research we've done. And we'll discuss how we intend to go about it and what we think we'll find. Yes, and then your recommendations and comments will be welcome. But before I continue, I would like us to have a look at the course content for an MPhil translation program for one of Ghana's traditional universities. Sorry. And as you may see, we have research methods, translation theory and methods 1, translation theory and methods 2, introduction to interpreting, simulated interpreting, practical translation 1, practical translation 2, critique of translation, scientific and technical translation. So this is what the university is offering. So our question is, will it prepare graduates to hit the job market running? Will it prepare them enough to be able to succeed on the market? Well, we may try to answer these questions in our work. In Ghana, translators have been trained for over several years, since 1964, when the School of Translators of the Ghana Institute of Languages was established by Ghana's first president. That was in 1964. So for a very long time, it was just the School of Translators, SOT, that was running the translation and interpreting programs. It used to be a diploma program, and then it became a bachelor's degree program. But along the lines, as the translation profession became more attractive and demands increased, other universities also introduced the program. So for example, the University of Ghana introduced its MA program in 2003, and then quite recently in 2020 introduced the PhD program. And then we have the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology that runs the MPhil and PhD programs, and we have the University of Cape Coast as well. So why do we think it is even necessary to conduct this study? Well, over the years, the emphasis has been so much on training professional translators for the job market. And so not much has been done concerning the research aspects of translation studies, especially in relation to translator training, curriculum design, student expectations, assessment and evaluation, among others. So this study is going to provide some empirical data on translator training in Ghana. So this, we believe that the data that's going to be gathered will be tailored to the Ghanaian context, because I'm aware that This is not a new thing. In Brazil, Spain, and in other countries, studies have been conducted concerning curriculum design and translator training. So we believe that this one is solely for the Ghanaian context, and it will help rethink the translator training process and curriculum design process. And if we find any gaps, we hope that the study will propose solutions to bridge these gaps and ultimately help improve translator training in the Ghanaian context. Over the years in Ghana, there have been calls for educational institutions to teach courses that are relevant, that are tailored to the requirements and needs of the job market. But studies have shown that in Ghana, curriculum is rarely updated to meet the ever-changing market. And yet, the curriculum is expected to meet the needs of both students and the market. And so, talking about the importance of curriculum in training, GABA 2000 puts it beautifully that the first stumbling block that threatens the success of a translation program is an erroneous approach to curriculum design. And I think I agree with him. So in a way, it's sort of saying that a curriculum is, if I may say, the lifeline of a training program, of the translator training program. And for the curriculum and institution to achieve its aim of churning out well-trained translators, then it needs to liaise with industry. So the more it listens to industry, the more it is able to achieve its aim of properly training translators. And so industry, in my opinion, plays a pivotal role in curriculum design. What are we looking for? What is the aim of this research? We intend to give an insight into the role that the translator industry plays in the curriculum design process in Ghana. We would also want to look at the skills and competencies from the perspective of industry and trainees that are relevant for a translator to succeed on the Ghanaian market. We also want to look at whether there is any significant differences. This is to help us identify whether there is a mismatch between what is done in the classroom and what is expected on the job market. And also find out from graduates of who have received training from these two institutions, whether they were satisfied with the training, whether they felt that there were some parts, certain things that were lacking, among other things. And so the questions we ask are, how does translator training in Ghana interact with the translation market in terms of curriculum design? And also, what are the needs of translators in Ghana from the perspective of trainers and industry? And are there any significant differences between these two perspectives? And also find out from the graduates how confident or satisfied they are in the training they received. And so, as I said earlier, we are yet to conduct the study. And so we think that there is not much interaction between those who design the curriculum, because it's not always the trainers that design the curriculum. So we think that there's not much interaction between those who design the curriculum and professionals and employers on the market. We also think that when it comes to competencies and skills required to succeed on the job market as a translator, both trainers and industry would agree that a good translator should have very good computer skills, have very fast typing speed, be able to render images to reflect the original document, be able to meet deadlines, work under pressure, have search and research skills, so referencing skills, be able to find which information will help in producing very good translation, and be able to work autonomously and manage and design projects without missing deadlines and then client specification. Although both industry and trainers will agree on these competencies, in our opinion, we think that trainers and industry are likely to put emphasis on different aspects. So trainers are likely to put emphasis on theories, the ability to speak and write well, research methods. That is not necessarily doing research, finding the right information for the translation work, but maybe research generally to be able to write a paper, write a thesis, and then trainers are likely to focus on student academic performance, whereas industry would put more emphasis on the translator's knowledge of the profession, that is client confidentiality, managing relationship with clients, among other things. And also the translator's ability to produce quality work under pressure and then be able to meet deadlines, and also be able to manage projects that he or she is assigned. When it comes to the graduate satisfaction with the training they received, we think that graduates are likely to be somewhat satisfied with the training that they have received, but would have preferred that institutions put more emphasis on project management, although there may be some aspects in the training, but they would prefer that they received more training on that. And also, in addition to having documents translated at home and then discussed, we think that graduates would also want some more real life on the market assignments. So for example, handling a large project with a group. So students can be given a large project and then they work as a team, to see how things are done on the job market, at least to give them a fair idea of what is expected or what is done on the market, particularly for those who are entirely new to the profession. And we also think that students, graduates of the training institutions selected would have preferred a lot more training on the use of CAT tools and other softwares that are needed to produce quality translation, because the translation market is evolving, it's ever changing, and there's always the need to acquire more and improve on the use of technology. Thank you very much. My colleague Samuel will continue with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Linda, for taking us through. So the question we ask ourselves is, how are we going to embark on this research? So we are looking at the methodology. What method? How are we going to collect data? How are we going to get our data? So we are looking in this particular work at using the quantitative and qualitative methods. So giving out open-ended questions to a professional translator, so people who are already on the market and who are already professionals, who are actually in the industry. We are hoping to give them open-ended questions, and then equally interview graduates from both the School of Translators and the University of Ghana Foreign Department. So finding out from them, so with regards to what they think are areas where the curriculum should focus on, and so from the perspective of professional translators, what they think, they haven't been on the market, what they think graduates or students or trainees from these institutions should be given as training, so that we can, all in the view of proposing these to curriculum designers, and then to help in designing this curriculum. And then equally, trainers as well will be a focus, because the trainers are not always the same people who draw out the curriculum. So trainers we have different perspectives or ideas, even though they may have been given different curriculum to teach. So we are hoping to find out from them as well. And then quantitatively, in terms of ranking, like my colleague mentioned in the fourth hypothesis, we are going to administer questionnaires to about 100 respondents. So that includes the professionals and the trainers to rank which of the qualities expected from trained translated that they are going to rank higher. I mean, in terms of ranking. So we see on the basis of the questionnaire that will be administered, and then we're going to analyze the data that would come out of there, and then be able to see in terms of, and to be able to either to verify the hypothesis, the fourth hypothesis that we've already spoken about, to be able to verify and then be able to well place them, and then use them also as a backup in presenting these data to curriculum designers. So the idea, like I've already said, the BA translation is offered at SOT, and then after that, the graduates are expected on the job market to start working, and then others, of course, go for further studies. Likewise, in the MA translation at the University of Ghana, graduates enter into the job market, and others go for further studies. So the focus is on the graduates, as well as the trainers in SOT and the University of Ghana, and then the employers of the translators. Now, the employers may not necessarily be professional translators. It may just be individuals, maybe who are already established their businesses or companies, even if it is government agencies. They may not necessarily be professional translators, and then as well as professionals who are already on the market, maybe as freelance translators or as employed translators in companies or industries working with them. So what then, at the end of this research, what are we expecting? So it is our hope that with the data collected and the analysis that will be performed, we are hoping to be able to find that curriculum design, there is a difference between what the students or graduates are taught in the classroom and what the market actually requires. So what the student may be taught, like we saw in the first slide of the curriculum for one of the universities. Is it what the market actually requires of them? Is it the kind of training the market requires from them? Are they going to be able to fit in the market? We are hoping that this comes out as a result of this study. And then again, we are hoping to confirm that some translator trainers may not necessarily have a professional background. Not all translators or not all translator trainees and trainers, have professional backgrounds and are professionals or even have translator training background. So we are hoping that this will be one of the expected results at the end. And then that the current curriculum does not seem to emphasize modern day technology. Like we saw in the slide from the university, the idea of inculcating modern day technology, the use of the CAD tools and others, is not really primarily something that is given priority, although it may be implicit in the courses, but not really given a priority. Whilst we do know that our modern day, particularly in the field of translation, with the advent of neural translation technologies and various technology in translation, students or graduates or trainees are expected to be up to date on these technologies. So we equally expect to find a mismatch between curriculum design and the market requirement. That's if there's no consultation with industry. We expect to find that most curriculum designers, the people who design the curriculum, like I have said, most of them may not necessarily be trainers, and so do not really have an up-to-date information or an up-to-date knowledge of what the market really requires. we expect to find that there is that kind of a mismatch as a result of the lack of consultation between these two parties. So conclusively, this research or this study, we are hoping that at the end of the study, the data collected and the analysis that will come out will be at least a step to sort of to propose to curriculum designers in these two institutions as to the elements, if there are elements that we will find out as being more important that need to be introduced within the curriculum, which are not already being done, that we'll be able to propose these to curriculum designers, and then hopefully will help in the improvement of translator trainings. So this is the summary of our work that we hope to perform. Thank you.
Colleagues, thank you so much for your presentation. Time for questioning. Any comments, questions? Thank you for listening. Peter, can we have your hand first? Thank you. Peter, is your microphone? I think there's a problem with your connection or with your microphone. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Enoch Sebonyongo.
Thank you very much. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank Linda and Samuel for a very riveting presentation. I do have two questions. First, I noticed that in this research, we are looking at what the graduates think, what the trainers think, what the professionals think, what the employers think. What about the administrators of the academic programs in these universities? Have they also been involved in this study? My second question is about the CAT tools that have been mentioned. I think they were mentioned by Linda. And I'm just wondering, in our African universities, translation is not only translation with international languages like English and French, but translation also regards our local African languages. Some people have argued that our African languages cannot yet be adapted to technology. In other words, we cannot use CAT tools for our African languages yet because we still need to do research on translation software integration in our languages. How is that being handled in Ghana? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enoch, for your question. So with regards to administrators, I think we implicitly mentioned that those who design the curriculum are not necessarily the trainers. So the administrators are part of those who design the curriculum. But I think we didn't really put much emphasis on them. So thank you for the question and I'll take recommendation. We are going to put much more emphasis on the administrators. When it comes to the use of CAT tools, okay, so Luke has just posted something that CAT tools have African languages already. So yes, to add to that, some effort has been made to use CAT tools for some languages already, but I think there is much more work that needs to be done. We are not yet there, but we've made some progress, I should say.
Thank you for that response. The next hand is Nkonu Emmanuel. Nkonu?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, mine is not a question, maybe a comment or suggestion. I can say that it's so heartwarming to know that some work is going on in curriculum.
Can I just, Nkonu, can I interrupt you? Nkonu, can I interrupt you?
The research is still going on. This is a very, very good news.
Nkonu?
I thank that working now, please.
I think your line.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, but your line is very bad. I'm not sure whether the rest of the colleagues can hear you or the president.
Okay, let me quickly run up.
Can I ask you? Can I ask you?
It will
No.
be better.
Nkonu, it's not working. Can I ask you to type your suggestions? Can I ask you to?
Yeah. I think I'm in a better location now. Can you? Yes. Can you hear me?
No, we can't. Can I ask you to type your question in the chat room, please? I'm going to move on to the next hand, and we have Ebenezer.
Well, if it is not, yeah, if it is not good now, then I'm afraid. Is it okay now?
No, it's not. I think you'll have to type your question for us in the chat room. Thank you, Nkonu.
Okay.
I'm moving on to the next hand, Ebenezer and Tenjong.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you for this good presentation. So I just want to ask the two speakers, because the previous question was about including administrators. And I'm asking myself whether including the perspective of end users will bring something additional to this quest. Because in fact, you may have a market with industry players and everything, but which is organized to exclude some of the end users. For example, you may have a market where they translate documents for high administration, but forget the need to integrate, training at the police station, translation at the police station and other places where translation is not done in the very classical and formal way. So how do we make sure, anyway, I'm thinking that integrating some end users can bring some more elements and help design this training to incorporate all of the needs of the community. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. The two speakers, any one of you would like to respond to that?
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Ebenezer. We are grateful for that. I think your comment is more of a contribution, and I think it's worth taking into consideration. Looking at the fact that translation that happens, for example, in the police stations, may be entirely different from translation that happens in various contexts. Particularly when we look at the terminology that is used in these various places and the requirement in these very different areas. So I think it's something that we can incorporate into at least getting their perspectives as well, just like you said. So thank you for that. I believe we would take note of that and then do that as well. Thank you.
Then we have still time. Beatrice Manigat, your hand is also up.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for this presentation. So I'm a conference interpreter trained at the University of Ghana and graduate assistant at the Department of French. And I really commend my colleagues for this valuable presentation. And I myself, I'm very much interested in the integration of local languages in the training of interpreters and translators. That is the object of my research from a Haitian perspective, because I come from the Caribbean and Haiti is a bilingual country. And this is a matter that is very much discussed. So my question was how my colleagues have, if and then how they factor in the question of training interpreters and translators by integrating the question of local languages as a need for the local market. That's a question. Thank you.
Good. Any one of the two presenters?
Beatrice, I'm not sure I got your question. Could you repeat?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. If we consider the adequacy between the training of translators and interpreters today and the needs of the local markets and the reality of people speaking local languages and not necessarily mastering English or French or Portuguese or Spanish, for instance. So in your research, in your work, is there any question where you somehow integrate the need for training interpreters and translators within the local languages, how to integrate the reality of the local languages in the training today?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, I got the question now. Thank you very much. We haven't thought of it that way, but I think it will be very good to include it in our research. So we are going to note it down and then yes, add it. It's a very interesting point you've made. So we are going to note it down and then add it in our work. Thank you very much, Beatrice.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And congratulations again.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm going to take the last question, and that is from Jennifer Talau. Jennifer. Let's switch on your microphone. I'm not sure whether you can hear me. Your microphone is still muted. Okay, it seems like we have Jennifer is a problem. Okay, go ahead. Okay, colleagues, I think we're going to leave it here. We had some questions to your presentation, and I'm sure the chat will goes on, and you can also respond directly to the questions or the comments on the chat room. So once again, thank you to the presentations that we had in this section and this session, and I'm going to hand over now to the chair for the next session, and that is Dr. Marshall Kapu, who will take it further from here. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on your location. I think you are hearing me. Can you get me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Kapo.
Okay. It's a great pleasure for me to take part in this conference, and I'm honored to present Dr. Joel Sidney, who will have his talk from now on. If you can allow me to present him briefly, Dr. Sidney Joel is the president of Audio Description Associates, LLC. He's the director of Audio Description Projects, American Council of the Blind. He's a winner of the 2014 Vermont Henley Media Awards for promoting and furthering the availability of audio description, winner of the Career Achievement Awards in audio description of the American Council of the Blind. One of the first audio describers, Joel Disney, a PhD holder, is a true pioneer in the audio description field. He began describing theater, events, and media in 1981, a member of Actors Equity Association, the American Federation of TV and Radio Artists, and the Screen Actor Guild, and a 20 years veteran of work as an art specialist for the National Endowment of the Arts. Is perhaps best known internationally as one of the first audio describers at the world's first audio description service. His topic is audio description, making the visual verbal. That means to translate image into words. Access to the art of people who are blind in Africa. Shall we welcome Dr. Sidney for his presentation on such a very insightful topic? Dr. Sidney, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let me simply share my screen here, and we will begin our presentation. But thank you, Dr. Kakpo. I appreciate your kind introduction. And I want to just check one more item here. Looks like I'm sharing my sound rather. So greetings from the United States. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. And yes, and indeed, as Dr. Kakpo said, my field is audio description, which is all about translating visual images to words, principally for the benefit of people who are blind or have low vision. So I have a screen being projected right now, which is principally text. How do you translate text to a form, a sense form that's accessible to people who are blind? Well, you read it simply, and I will do that. Audio Description Associates, LLC, the Visual Made Verbal presents Audio Description, the Visual Made Verbal, Access to the Arts for People Who Are Blind in Africa, with Joel Snyder, PhD, President, Audio Description Associates, LLC, Director, Audio Description Project, ACB, or American Council of the Blind. Association for Translation Studies in Africa, Tuesday, June 8th, 2021, 1405 to 1450 GMT. And at the bottom of the screen, the words American Audio Description Symbol. Around a logo, an image, a white square within which are two letters in bold black type, an A and a D. The left side of that A is tilted just a bit toward the right, and to the right of the curve in the D, 3 curved lines. Period. Period. Why do I say that? Stop. Well, because sometimes beginning describers will go on and say something like, oh, they represent sound waves. True enough, they do. But there's nothing on the screen that says that for sighted people. Why would you say that on behalf of people who are blind? At best, it's just unnecessary. It's unnecessary. People who are blind grow up in the world. They know as much as anyone else. At worst, it could seem offensive, patronizing, or condescending. You might perhaps put it in the context of a simile, like sound waves, something like that. But the point is knowing our audience, that the people for whom we're providing a service, they don't see, or they don't see well, but their brains are perfectly well intact. We describe, we don't explain. We show, we don't tell. So let's begin. What better way to start a session on audio description than with description of a few visual images. I have a cartoon, a comic on the screen, and some of you maybe who can see this image at all may have some trouble. You're leaning forward. Why doesn't he enlarge it on the screen? It's too small. I can't see it well. That's my point. There's method in my madness. Even for sighted people, audio description can be valuable when the presenter didn't enlarge the image, for instance. So, can you read that caption at the bottom? I doubt it. Let me help. A little audio description. The Fan by John McPherson. On a stage, at left, a man in a flowing, rather a woman in a flowing gown, her hands clasped in front of her, stands before a kneeling man in a doublet and feathered cap. He croons, "Why does thy heart turn away from mine?" At right, a man at a microphone speaks. Basically, the guy with the goofy hat is ticked because this babe has been running around with the dude in the black tights. The caption reads, "Many opera companies now provide interpreters for the culturally impaired." Yeah, and I'll tell you, when I first saw this cartoon, I looked at that man kneeling. I thought he had an axe in his head. Doesn't that look like that? But if I've been listening to the audio description, it's just the feathered cap. That's a good thing. And he's wearing a doublet. Hard to make that out, but as a sighted person, it provided confirmation, clarification. It even taught me a little bit. So audio description for sighted people. One more. Red and Rover by Brian Bassett. In the first panel, Red, a red-haired 8-year-old boy, is outdoors, lying on the ground against a tree, facing away from us, and his right arm is around Rover, a white short-haired dog, a lab beagle mix. A leaf falls. Red announces brown. In the next panel, as Rover's tail taps, Red notes orange, red, yellow. In the following panel, red, orange, yellow, yellow. Next, Red turns toward us, eyes wide, and tells us, "Dogs only see in black and white." The final panel depicts a more full view of the tree, leaves scattered about the pair as Red continues, yellow, orange, brown, red, orange. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, audio description for dogs. Colorblind dogs. Dogs are colorblind. They only perceive a certain portion of the color spectrum, if you will. But some people will look at this cartoon and say, "That's cute, but why are you talking about color?" blind people don't know anything about color. Why emphasize color? Well, that's just incorrect. Yeah, you know, most people who are blind had vision at one point in their life. Blindness is largely age related. So obviously color has meaning as a hue, as a frequency of light, but even someone who is congenitally blind, blind from birth, again, they grow up in the world, they learn about the world, they hear people talk about color, and it's not just a hue, it means things. Red is a warm color. It might mean love. It might signify blood. Yellow might signify cowardice. Green, in my country, the United States, green is all about money. So color has meaning and can be of interest even to people who are congenitally blind. Oftentimes I will subtitle my presentation with a phrase, "If your eyes could speak." That's really what audio description is. Well, I stole that phrase from a movie of about 10 years ago, The Book Thief. Perhaps you saw it. It involves a young man who's being hidden in the basement of a home for his safety. The windows in the basement area have been blacked out so no one can see in, but he can't see out. So he doesn't know what the outside is doing. And every now and then a young girl in the house will come down to visit him. And they'll talk about words and language. And this is what happens.
Tell me, where do you get these words?
Okay.
It's a secret.
And who would I tell? Can you do me a favor? Can you describe the day for me? What's it like outside?
It's cloudy.
No. Make the words yours. If your eyes could speak, what would they say?
It's a pale day.
Pale. Good, go on.
Everything's stuck behind a cloud. And the sun doesn't look like the sun.
What does it look like?
Like a silver oyster.
Thank you. I saw that.
He saw that. He points to his head. He saw that in his mind's eye. A young girl describing the sun as a silver oyster. Audio description is a kind of translation. It's a literary art form. It's about words. It's a type of poetry, perhaps. In fact, I'd say even more akin to a haiku. I say that because we use as few words as possible to provide that verbal version of the visual. The visual is made verbal and oral, A-U-R-A-L, he points to his ear, and oral, O-R-A-L, he points to his mouth. Using words that are succinct, vivid, and imaginative, we translate images to words on behalf of a segment of the population. In fact, new estimates here in the US by the American Foundation for the Blind, they put that number that there are people who use description or could at over 30 million Americans alone who are blind or have difficulty seeing even with correction. That's 8% of the population. And I'm sure that holds true for countries throughout Africa, or maybe higher, possibly. And of course, visual images are not fully realized by the rest of us. The rest of us sighted folks who see, but do we really observe? We take in the world visually in an active way, or are we more passive, just walking through and not noticing? So audio description is useful for anyone who wants to truly notice and appreciate a more full perspective on a visual event, but especially helpful as an access tool for people who are blind or have low vision. I've provided audio description at thousands of arts events, of course, media, film, television, theater. It began with theater, museums, other performing arts, but I've also described weddings, parades, rodeos, circuses, sports events, and I've even described funerals. But let me help you see what description is all about by asking you figuratively. You don't need to really do this. I'm going to ask you figuratively to close your eyes. You don't need to do it because I'm going to close your eyes for you. What you're going to experience next is the original soundtrack of an excerpt from a major motion picture, The Color of Paradise. I'm just going to play the soundtrack, the original soundtrack from this clip. I want you to experience it as a totally blind person would, sitting in the movie theater with friends, coming to enjoy this film, but there's no audio description. And they get up to this sequence, this segment. What can you glean about the film when you're limited to listening only? Listen, and what do you get when there's no image? Wow, that was long. What was going on? Hard to tell. That was what a blind person would experience at the movie theater with no description. I think the blind person would probably leave and not have access to the film. No, I'll tell you. Let's try something. Let's experience the same excerpt again. You're all still blind. But this time, there'll still be no picture, but this time, let's add the audio description that I wrote and voiced when this was presented on national television here in the United States. Will it make a difference having the audio description? Let's see by listening.
Mohammed kneels and taps his hands through the thick ground cover of brown curled leaves. A scrawny nestling struggles on the ground near Mohammed's hand. His palm hovers above the baby bird. He lays his hand lightly over the tiny creature. Smiling, Mohammed curls his fingers around the chick and scoops it into his hands. He stands and strokes its nearly featherless head with a fingertip. Mohammed starts as the bird nips his finger. He taps his finger on the chick's gaping beak. He tilts his head back, then drops it forward. Mohammed tips the chick into his front shirt pocket. Wrapping his legs and arms around a tree trunk, Mohammed climbs. He latches onto a tangle of thin upper branches. His legs flail for a foothold. Mohammed stretches an arm between a fork in the trunk of the tree and wedges in his head and shoulder. His shoes slip on the rough bark. He wraps his legs around the lower trunk, then uses his arms to pull himself higher. He rises into thicker foliage and holds onto tangles of smaller branches. Gaining his footing, Mohammed stands upright and cocks his head to one side. An adult bird flies from a nearby branch. Mohammed extends his open hand. He touches a branch and runs his fingers over wide green leaves. He pats his hand down the length of the branch. His fingers trace the smooth bark of the upper branches, search the network of connecting tree limbs, and discover their joints. Above his head, Mohammed's fingers find a dense mass of woven twigs, a bird's nest. Smiling, he removes the chick from his shirt pocket and drops it gently into the nest beside another fledgling. He rubs the top of the chick's head with his index finger. Mohammed wiggles his finger like a worm and taps the chick's open beak. Smiling, he slowly lowers his hand.
Okay, a bit more clear. Yes, that's the power of audio description, bringing clarity through translation of images to words. But I have a question. Just from having listened closely to the original soundtrack with description and the description of Mohammed and his interaction with the tree, what can you tell me about him? Now remember, the character Mohammed, he was already described earlier in the film. This is an excerpt toward the middle. You know, so most people will respond, well, he's a young boy, he's kind, he likes animals, he can climb a tree, he's wearing a shirt with a pocket and has shoes on. All of it true, but what else can you glean from thinking about how the description was written regarding his interaction with his surroundings? I suspect that some of you will be surprised after watching this excerpt. We're gonna experience it again, but with the video. After about 15 seconds, I think some of you will be surprised. And as you watch this now, again, consider the words used and why. The images that were chosen for description. Would you have singled out other images? Description is often about what not to describe. So I'm granting sight now to everybody who had it when we began. Everybody will be able to see the excerpt with the original soundtrack and the audio description. Yeah, Mohammed is blind. And had you been listening closely, that second time through without a picture, but hearing the description, you know, there were a lot of words that had to do with haptic, tactile action. His fingers trace the nest, runs his fingers down the leaves and the branches. That's how he gets to know his world. That's what the director was showing us, and that's what I described. We are in service to the people listening, but also to the creator of whatever it is we're describing. We want to be true to what they want to show, what their vision is. Indeed, how description is done, let's take a moment simply to look at the script for the audio description. And I've annotated it to bring out certain elements of audio description. The first line, Muhammad kneels and taps his hands through the thick ground cover of brown curled leaves. Well, even without sight, brown curled leaves, what does that tell you? Of course, it's fall. And color, again, color has been shown to be important to people with low vision, even people who are congenitally blind. A little further down, there's a bit of gasping and chirping for 2 seconds, and then we come in with the description. I note that because timing is so critical in the crafting of description. We are weaving descriptive language around a film's sound elements, not just dialogue. There is no dialogue in this excerpt. And then further down, he curls his fingers around the chick and scoops it into his hands. He doesn't just grab it. He doesn't pick it up. No, he scoops it. Vivid verbs help conjure images in the mind's eye. On the next page, he taps his finger on the chick's gaping beak. He tilts his head back, then drops it forward. Muhammad tips the chick into his front shirt pocket. Remember I compared description to haiku or poetry. Well, sure, description, like much poetry, is written to be heard. Alliteration, taps, tilts, tips can add variety and help to maintain interest in someone who's just listening. Further along, an adult bird flies from a nearby branch. Well, I mentioned earlier, description can be oftentimes really about what not to describe. How do you choose from all these visual elements? You can't describe everything. How do you choose what to describe? This is important, this image, because the adult bird returns in the next scene. Perhaps that's a bit of foreshadowing planted by the director. So we want to be sure we bring that out for the moviegoer who can't see, doesn't have access to the image. And then towards the end, he rubs the top of the chick's head with his index finger, not his pinky, not his thumb. No, specificity, being specific, precision creates images. And then finally, what does he do with that index finger? He wiggles his finger like a worm. Like a worm. Similes can paint pictures. Now, there's no worm there. So in a way, describers, even you see what's going on, you need to observe, but sometimes you see beyond what's going on and invoke an image that's not even there, but you do so in order to clarify in the mind's eye of the person listening exactly what's going on. And that's what that simile does, like a worm, wiggles his finger like a worm. I have a true story for you. A blind fellow here in the United States was visiting a museum once, and he was with some friends, and a woman had the temerity, a sighted woman had the temerity to come up and approach him and say, "Excuse me, but what are you doing in a museum? You can't see any of the exhibits." Well, he was a little taken aback, but his response, "I'm here for the same reason anyone goes to a museum. I want to learn, I want to know, I want to be a part of our culture." The point is that his inability to see shouldn't deny him access to our culture, the culture of any country, in the United States, in Ghana, throughout Africa, in Europe. Culture belongs to everyone. And I think it's the responsibility of any public institution to be as inclusive as possible. make their images accessible to the person who's blind or has low vision. It's all about access to culture, and that is everybody's right. It comes down to this: there is simply no good reason why a person with a particular physical disability must also be culturally disadvantaged. No. And I want to emphasize one point. Again, I'm coming to you from the United States, and here in this country, the principal constituency for audio description, people who are blind, has an unemployment rate of 70%, 70%. The general unemployment rate here now, even on the edge of the COVID epidemic, is about 5%. But blind people, 70%. Well, I think that with more meaningful access to culture and its resources, people just naturally become more informed, more engaged with society. Perhaps they become more engaging individuals and thus more employable. So I have on the screen right now the URL, the website for the American Council of the Blind's audio description project. I founded this initiative about 11 years ago with the American Council of the Blind. And I just want to make sure you're aware of the website of the project. We have so many different initiatives. We train describers. We work with blind children. We have a conference every 2 years. And the website itself provides all you would want to know about audio description in the United States and to a certain extent around the world. So please visit at acb.org/ADP. And I'll conclude and take your questions with, I have my contact information on the screen. I'll leave that up there. Joel Snyder, PhD. My own website is audiodescribe.com. And you can reach me if you have questions that we don't address today, jsnyder@audiodescribe.com. There's the Audio Description Project website again. And I wrote a book that you may be interested in, The Visual Made Verbal, a comprehensive training manual and guide to the history and applications of audio description. It's available at amazon.com, at thevisualmadeverbal.net. And by the way, of course, it came out in English when it was published by the American Council of the Blind in 2014, but it's available now in Portuguese, in Polish, in Russian. A Spanish version will be out by the end of the summer. It's in Braille and as 2 different audio books. And we're working on versions in Chinese, Italian, and I'd like to get it translated into French, and perhaps some of you listening can help with that. Finally, at the bottom of the screen, I'm noting the American Council of the Blind's Audio Description Project, our 18th Audio Description Project, Audio Description Institute. For the second time, we'll be doing it virtually. This August 2nd through 6th, 2021, 5 very intense days on how to become an audio describer. So essentially what that means is if you did not enjoy the last 40 some minutes with me, you certainly will not enjoy 5 days with me in August. But if you'd like to, go to the Audio Description Project website for more information. We would love to have you sign up. And with that, Dr. Kopko, I'm available for any questions the group may have. I think you're muted. Dr. Kopko, I think you're muted.
I awfully thank you. It's the moment now for comments and questions. So those who have questions have someone to take the floor for the question now to Dr. Snyder. We thank him for this brilliant and very inspiring presentation. I do confess that I learned a lot of things from it, as my colleague has confessed as well. So, and I summon now those who want to ask question to take the floor for it.
I see one question in the chat from Samuel. In your very thorough work, do you encounter differences between people born blind and those who turn blind later in life? If yes, how do you bridge the gap and help them make meaning, since description of colors and objects, for example, may be strange to people who have been born blind? Well, indeed, I question the notion of color being strange. Again, color means all kinds of things. So I think color can be appreciated even by people who are congenitally blind. But you raise a very good point, because we are, certainly for broadcast television, for movies, we're dealing with a wide spectrum of people with vision loss. Most of our audience is not people who are totally blind. Most people have some sight. A lot of folks think that blind people, or people use description, that means, oh, you've been blind from birth and you have no light perception. Well, that's not true. The vast majority are people who do have some sight, and it's a balancing act between providing description that will be useful for the majority of people, the broad range of people in the audience. Because you don't know who's in the audience, it's heterogeneous. Now, however, for 6 years, I wrote and voiced the description for Sesame Street, a children's television show, where we knew the audience was kids, 3 to 5 years old. There, we could craft language to be appropriate for that audience. But typically, you don't really have a good handle on exactly who you're describing for whom you're describing.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Now, if there's any question, the floor is now for any person who wants to ask question to Dr. Snyder on this very inspiring and brilliant presentation. You have the floor. Wes, you can type your question or ask it directly as you see fit. Any question or comment? Okay, I've seen a hand. I don't know who is laying the hand. Hello.
A lot of very excellent comments in the chat that
questions.
I'm going
through. Dr. Snyder is waiting for questions from you or comments.
Right. And someone makes the point that audio description is a good example of intersemiotic translation. It can go from language to another mode, or from another mode to language, or between two non-lingual modes. I think Dr. Moraes made that comment, so which I think is an excellent point.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Now we are waiting for them to see if they still have questions or comments, to give them the floor for that.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a hand. Professor Bandia's hand.
Okay, you have the floor, Professor.
Hello. Thank you, Joel, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Like most of our comments indicate, it's an eye-opener for all of us. Most of us, actually, yeah, because we just caught.
Very good. Yes.
Indeed, it is like we're just caught up in text and signs that may not necessarily take into account the hearing impaired or the visually impaired and all that. So I'm really impressed with this, and I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor to introduce this to African translation studies, so that we really come to these from as scholars and move on to a practical application of this kind of work.
Absolutely.
I was just wondering, from a purely theoretical standpoint, and this is kind of a minor question, it's like, how do you account for cultural specificities in this kind of work? I suppose you understand what I'm saying. If you're working for Africa or for United States or for Europe or for South America, is that something that you people take into account? The whole aspect of cultural specificity, or is there mainly an overriding universal discourse, universal language that cuts across cultures?
That's an excellent question, Paul. There are basic fundamentals to what is good audio description. But cultural specificity is so critical. The way someone would describe the same image, but the person describing it is in the United States versus someone in Ghana versus someone in Germany will be different in many ways, given their training or their understanding of description, but certainly given cultural specificity. You know, some people will say, okay, we need this film described. Oh, we're going to be showing it in many Spanish-speaking countries. So can we just go ahead and translate your English description into Spanish and have it voiced by a Spanish-speaking person? Well, studies have shown that just doing a simple translation is not as effective as having someone who is a native-born speaker of Spanish based in Spain, let's say, or some other country where Spanish is spoken, having them learn the fundamentals of description and describe it anew in that language and have them voice it. That's going to be more effective, in my humble opinion, than simply translating from English into Spanish. And first of all, the timings don't work because speaking Spanish takes 30% longer than speaking English. So the timings have to be adjusted anyway. But you're absolutely right. And the other reason I think it's great you brought that up, I have had the great honor of speaking on description in 40 some states in the US and over 60 countries. But in Africa, I've only made presentations in Morocco, Egypt, and South Africa. Africa is a big continent with many countries in between, many French-speaking countries, other countries speaking native languages. The people I work with in South Africa are now doing description in Zulu. I would love to be able to make presentations and spread the word about description throughout Africa, and the association with the ATSA, I think will help me do that, help me help others do that as well. But great question about cultural specificity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now if there's any other question, you have the floor for your question or comment on the very inspiring topic and presentation that we have from Dr. Snyder.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, you have the floor.
Thanks. Joel, nice meeting you virtually at last.
Yes, yes.
I have a sort of a weird question. So I understand audio description is aimed at visually impaired people in whichever format. But is there tendencies, for instance, to provide, let's say, taste descriptions for people who have taste impairments, or smell descriptions for people who have smell impairments, or tactile descriptions for people with tactile impairments? Is there a tendency to do that, or is that still not really done?
I think that's a great point. And you make me think of people who are deaf blind. Many sign interpreters who work for people who are deaf blind and will sign into somebody's hand, they take training with me because they realize that not only do they have to translate what someone's saying, they have to translate what they can see. They have to describe it and sign that into the person's hand as well. So you make me think of that. The idea of describing taste, describing touch, is something that I'm not aware of there's being much research or study or practice in that, but it will come, I think, because description can be used in so many different contexts. For instance, speakers of a different language, people learn English by watching captions on English-speaking film. Same with description, for an English movie. But for people who are on the autism spectrum, people who have learning disabilities, and a wide range of others. Audio description can be helpful. I did a presentation for the Easy Language Conference a few weeks ago. There too, people listening to description hear synonyms, they hear varied word choice. You can't help but lift the level of literacy in people who listen to description. So even sighted people. But that was an excellent question again. Thank you so much. And I see someone saying that they're tempted to think about interpreting, translating for the senses, touch, smell, sight, smell, and taste. That's great. Dr. Kakpo, you look like you're muted.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I was speaking. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I'm sorry for that. Now, I said that if there's any question, they have the floor now for the very last question. We still have 1 minute, I think. So, a question or comments on this very, very brilliant, I do confess, inspiring topic and brilliantly developed. Now, you have the floor. If any of you has comments, question, otherwise put an end to this section and I'll give the floor to the organizer.
And I will mention my email address again. I'll put it in the chat. If people do think of something afterwards and they're interested in contacting me, please do.
With pleasure.
jsnyder@audiodescribe.com.
Okay, so you can take note of it. I think they are writing, and it is on this we put an end to the session. And I give the floor to the organizer for any what they have to say. So we have to thank you, Dr. Snyder, for your very, very brilliant presentation. I learned a lot from it, and I confess that I'll join you later on for other things. As for that, as my colleague as well are expressing the same will. It's been a very good moment for us. So I give the floor to the organizer in case they have something to tell before concluding this session. Dr. Swenam or Luke, you have the floor. I think we are at the end of this presentation. If you have anything to say, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you all so much. We are really glad that we could enjoy these sessions today. From our end, we are done with the presentations for today. I don't know if Prof. Kobius, you would have, or ATSA would have anything to say.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I think we need to move into the AGM now.
Okay.
So if it is okay with you, maybe people want to take a 5 minutes, just quick comfort break.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Then we'll start. Let's start at what is it now? 7 minutes to. Let's give a 7 minutes break, and then we start on the hour.
Okay.
3 o'clock your time. Yes.
Sure. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you too.